When we first started grinding flour, we, couldn't have been more clueless about what we were doing. We had no idea what we were doing. So we needed sort of a sounding board as Greg started to experiment with, taking these local grains, grinding them and working with them. We were giving test batches of flour to Stefan, and he had been baking for a long time for his own enjoyment, and the bread he was making was so incredibly good that Stefan and I started kicking around the idea of, well, why don't we, as part of this whole thing, start a small CSA bakery to supply, local grain to local flour to an end product that people can buy as bread. And, honestly, nothing sells your flour like being able to give somebody a loaf of bread that's been made out of it, and that bread being really incredible. I've gotten better at growing the wheat. The wheat is of higher quality. There's a whole different mindset when you're a farmer doing a food grade product as opposed to a feed grade product. I mean, completely, it's the same on a certain level, but there's this whole extra component you have to throw in there in terms of processing, storage, cleanliness, all these different things that if you get that wrong, you're not going to have good flour, because you can't, crap in, crap out. If I don't send him really good quality grain, no matter what he can do to that flour, that's not going to happen. As we get more experienced, they send me information about what they need, so I have better targets. I know what I'm shooting for. Like when that wheat comes in, it needs to go down to 11.5 in order for it to grind properly. So when I'm drying it, I know where it's got to be the best. Or I know that if I keep it a little higher than that, it might get a little bit of a musty flavor, or we can get insects in there. In an organic system, that's a big deal because we're storing. So I've been on this learning curve, and they tell me, what they want. Stefan, in terms of maybe protein levels, or maybe there's a weed seed that gets in there that throws the flavor of the flour off a little bit. Like, do I need to adjust my cleaning practices or my cultural practices in terms of weed control and or fertility levels to get the protein levels where they are, also in terms of harvesting and keeping our falling numbers up so that the bread rises properly. These are all things that I've been learning through working with the mill and the bakery, so that I, as a farmer, can know what targets I'm shooting for and adjust my management practices to meet them. Now, some of that stuff is obviously out of my control, but the things that I can control, I know I got to stay on top of that. And that's certainly a pretty large challenge in the Northeast, where the weather is kind of, can be a little bit nuts. Didn't know if we were going to be able to produce the type of grain that would go into milling. And, part of the challenge for us was that nobody was really doing it. I mean, there is the soft white wheat market, which goes into pastry wheat, which is sort of traditional now for New York. If large growers are growing wheat, they're growing soft white to go into Pop-Tarts and stuff like that. But bread wheats, high protein wheats, super, high falling number wheats that are going to make good bread, people weren't growing that at all, pretty much. So there wasn't a knowledge base or an infrastructure base. And that, I think, we found challenging and did a lot of trial and erroring, and also sourcing cleaning equipment and other pieces of the puzzle to put together to produce flour that is from New York State was challenging. I mean, we got onto a really serious learning curve with processing the wheat, and also me, in terms of growing it, I had a lot to learn.